In considering audiences for our stories and messages, it's helpful to think of them in terms of segments. In advocacy and influence, as in marketing, there's no such thing as the general public, the student body, or any other large and undifferentiated group. We have to think of our audience instead as groups of people, and within these groups they have something in common and would be inclined to make similar decisions under similar circumstances. We're really trying to get into their heads to see why they make the decisions they do. We're seeking to understand and appeal to their reasons. So we can distinguish segments by sets of characteristics such as demographics or psychographics. Some examples of this differentiation are, for example, parents of preschoolers in households where both parents work outside the home, or single parents of preschoolers. Undergraduates who are registered in science programs in universities whose first language is Spanish. Seniors who are engaged in book clubs, that's another substantial segment. So even in plebiscites or bond issues in which large numbers of voters can have their say directly, the views of influencers can carry a great deal of weight. The media are influencers, of course, but also leaders of various demographic groups, such as seniors. Because people in different segments have different priorities, they are going to respond to different shades of the message, and they're going to respond to different messengers as well. There have been great grassroots advocacy campaigns that have been textbook examples of segmentation. The Libraries for All bond issue campaign in the 1990s in Seattle was one. The Seattle Public Library had a close and heartbreaking defeat in getting funding for its new library, for its capital program, a few years earlier. On the next round, the campaign organizers were more intentional in identifying distinct segments and in focusing on their interests and in reaching them. They specifically targeted, for example, senior citizens to get out their vote, and they appealed to individual neighborhoods. This strategy worked. In 1998, Seattle passed a $196.4 million bond issue, which was an unprecedented amount in the U.S. A fourth characteristic of effective communications is clarity. That is, being able to break through the noise and complexity that surrounds all decision makers. We are all bombarded by ideas and causes all day, every day, each asserting a claim on our attention. And we cope with this form of sensory overload by oversimplifying. In Rees and Trout's now classic work, Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind, the authors give us a couple of hints on positioning our cause in this crowded and very noisy landscape. First hint is less is more. Simplify your communications to the greatest extent possible and express your communication in few words. Secondly, focus on the mind of the audience. These authors, whose primary audience is businesses, call this being consumer-focused rather than product-focused. In advocacy applications, it means starting with the mindset of decision makers and influencers. Even though librarians strive to be and are responsive to their communities, this requirement to get into the heads of decision makers has been a huge challenge for our community. Do you remember the boy who whispered "zoom zoom" in a television ad for a car? At a library conference a few years ago, I heard an expert on advertising campaigns talk about the extraordinary power of that ad. It works, he told us, because it goes to the heart, speaks to the emotion of being in that car, not the features of the car. And it connects with the way people make car buying decisions. So, of course, we must be well informed, and we have to collect and respect data. It's part of our authority. It's also part of our accountability. But we also need our own response to the question in our own situations and with our own decision makers. What's our zoom zoom? We have to create sound bites that convey our story in a few well-chosen words. When the American Association of School Librarians developed an advocacy plan for their new school library document in the 1990s, they had the benefit of some solid research about the relationship between good school library programs and standardized test scores. They created the soundbite because student achievement is the bottom line, to resonate with the principals and administrators and school boards who put a high value on these test scores. It aligned the good school library program with the things that the decision makers valued most. Now, does this mean that the school librarians were unanimous in their approval of standardized test scores as the best way to measure the performance of schools? Probably not. But they did know that the scores mattered to their decision makers, so that the soundbite then represented a critical point of alignment with that agenda. That is what it means to be focused on the audience rather than on the advocates. The elevator speech is a slightly longer version of a soundbite, prepared for any short encounter with a decision maker or an influencer. The essentials are the same. Frame your message in terms of benefit to the community, importance to the decision maker, and establish some point of alignment with what you know to be a priority for your audience. And finally, simply speak from the heart. Obvious passion and conviction are persuasive. However, speaking from the heart convincingly is not exactly a simple matter. It simply looks simple when it works. Any government relations professional, however, will tell you that association spokespersons must be passionate, but they must never be preachy or self-righteous. Decision makers are not normally persuaded by being shamed or nagged or told that they should be doing better. Most of them believe that they have made the best decisions possible given the circumstances. In fact, shaming and contradicting can actually create pushback and opposition that's remembered for a long time. Bombastic, over-the-top communications aren't effective either because audiences just don't connect with them. So we have to find ways, in the words of Fenton Communications, to plug into the belief system of our audience or those who are influenced by our audience, not to rewire that belief system. Connecting is achieved through conveying respect for the audience and appealing to their values, not simply just asserting the values of the advocates. Our libraries are owned by our communities and not by us and by our allies in advocacy. Many support your library messages, no matter how passionately delivered, fall apart for just that reason. So do many support librarian messages. Built into the message has to be a motivation that is going to resonate deeply with our target audience. Why should they support a library? One rule of thumb is that if the message is library-centric or staff-centric, as in, save our library, save my job, it generally fails to connect. If it's community-centric and appeals to the values of the community, then we're on our way to some traction. In other words, our sound bites should convey the love we have for them. The learning package for this week includes 2 videos in which we learn more about telling our story well. Nancy Cronick, former president of ALA, will talk about framing our story. And Arch Lustberg trains librarians to deal with confrontation-style objections. Both of these are very important skills for advocates. Next week, we're going to continue to focus on practical applications of advocacy principles, in particular, the prerequisite for successful advocacy plans, and we will go through the 5-step planning framework. Bye for now.